My name is Lilo and my ego is a liar. And guess what? Yours is too. I'm a combat veteran, mother, and recovering high performer. This is a show about the lies we tell ourselves, how they shape us, how they break us, and what it takes to finally let them go. Let's uncover our lies to seek the truths underneath. Because before there's clarity, there's chaos. Let's navigate it together. So don your oxygen mask and take a deep breath. Welcome to Lies My Ego Told Me.
Welcome back, liars and truth seekers, to Lies My Ego Told Me. I'm Lilo Armandi, and today's guest is someone who learned very early how to move forward without waiting for fear to resolve itself. Sharon Betty Preszler wanted to fly from the time she was 4 years old. She was bold, curious, and decisive. She followed her instincts and chose the harder path without hesitation. When obstacles showed up, she didn't wait to negotiate with fear. She simply kept calm and carried on. That approach served her well. Betty became an Air Force pilot at a time when opportunities for women were still painfully limited. But when the law changed in 1993, she stepped into history to become the first woman ever to fly the F-16. Her career demanded courage, decisiveness, and composure, and she had those in abundance. It taught her how to stay composed under pressure, how to perform when the stakes were high, and how to keep moving when others might pause. What she didn't expect was that those same characteristics that carried her through combat would also be the ones she needed to carry her through motherhood and a time in her life where fear simply wasn't an option. Today, Betty is a keynote speaker and a certified life coach using her experience and expertise to help others navigate challenge, identity, and transition with honesty and clarity. Betty, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so glad to be here, Lilo. Thank you.
So 3 decades ago, you were thrust into the national spotlight along with now retired General Jeannie Leavitt and former Congresswoman Martha McSally as the first women allowed to fly combat aircraft. That's an episode in itself because I know for a fact that between the three of you, encyclopedias of wisdom could be shared. But there's one piece of wisdom in particular that's been your hallmark. You said, "Don't confuse fearlessness and courage. Courage is being afraid, but doing what you need to do anyway." So even though this is very true to you, there was another narrative that was running through your life. So Betty, tell us, what was the lie that your ego told you?
The lie my ego told me was, there's no time for fear.
When you think about your younger self, the one who dreamed of flying, who pushed into those male-dominated spaces, who kept raising her hand and wouldn't take no for an answer, it seems like you were a pretty fearless young woman. Did fear simply not factor into the equation in those early years?
No, I think fear is always a part of those kind of things. At least for me it was. It's just that, there's two kinds of fear, I think. There's a more physical fear and an emotional fear. And I was pretty fearless physically, but I was a little more fearful emotionally.
So let's go back to September of 1999. By this point in time, you are a highly experienced and respected fighter pilot. This is a big leap in your story. You have hundreds of hours at this point and an expert in your airframe. And the F-16s are experiencing these dangerous anomalies. And there was a string of ejections that were tied to mechanical failures. You happened to be the 7th of 9 ejections that were back to back. Walk us through that day.
Yeah, so I was returning back from a static display at an air show. So myself and my flight lead, I was acting as a wingman this time. We were flying back from Beale Air Force Base, and as we got closer to Luke, I got a malfunction with my jet. I had a battery low light, which the F-16 is a single-engine airplane, and if your engine quits for some reason, you need your battery to restart it. So we have procedures to follow. I followed all my procedures. I did all the things I was supposed to do, and then I recognized that my radios had quit working. So we have procedures for that as well. I followed those procedures, and essentially we're going to go back to Luke, and the flight lead is going to get me clearance to land my airplane, and then he's going to pass me the lead on final. So when we get back to Luke and I put my landing gear down for the approach, I hear the gear clunk, but there's no green lights that show me my gear's down. So when he tries to give me the lead to land, I shake it off. I'm like, nope, I'm not ready. And I give him a thumbs down, this is normally the symbol to lower your landing gear. But in this case, it was just a no, I'm not ready. But he went and checked my gear. you gave me the visual signal that they looked good, and we went around, and I came back and I landed at Luke. The landing itself was uneventful. And the way you land an F-16, you aero brake until you're below 100 knots. Aero brake is just hold the nose off the runway until you're below 100 knots, and then you let the nose lower gently to the runway, and you start braking. Well, when I did all that and I started braking, I stepped on the brake pedals and my feet went straight to the floor with no resistance whatsoever. And we've trained for this. We do it in the simulator all the time. So I followed the procedures and tried again. Change the brake channel, tried again. Turn the anti-skid off. Tried putting the hook down because there's cables at the end of the runway that I could possibly use to stop me. But none of that worked. This airplane was not going to stop. And we're taught very early in our training, in an F-16, if you look at it, especially compared to like an F-18 or something, the landing gear are very, very tiny. They're like little tiny tricycle gear, and it's not very stable airplane on the ground. So we're taught very young that if you depart a prepared surface, i.e. the taxiway or the runway, at greater than taxi speed, you eject. So when I got halfway into the overrun, so there's only like 500 feet of concrete ahead of me, and I'm still going, 70, 80 miles an hour, I made the decision to eject, and I pulled the ejection handle. That's, I don't know, the easy part of the story, if you will. When I pulled the ejection handle, it seemed in my mind that nothing happened. It seemed to take forever, right? And temporal distortion is a thing. Time does slow down when you're in crisis mode, or at least it feels like it slows down. So it seemed like an eternity. Was really not very long at all, a matter of a second or two, and my seat started moving, and I could tell that because I could smell the smoke and the cordite from like fireworks smell, and I could see the black and gray smoke billowing up around my feet because you're essentially sitting on a rocket motor. That's how your seat's going to get out of the airplane. And then I started moving up the rails, which was all good. But when the ejection initiates, it's 12 to 13 Gs, so 12 to 13 times the normal gravitational force. And what this does to you is it basically drains your body can't keep up and you don't get enough blood to your brain. I didn't lose consciousness, but I was unable to see for a few seconds, and that concerned me because I knew I was on the ground, which the ejection seat is certified for, but it's not optimum by any means. And because I was in a 2-seat aircraft, my seat, the front seat, was the only one that fired as it was supposed to, but it started going off to the right a little bit because we want to separate the 2 seats if you have 2 people ejecting. And I didn't want to go to the right. I wanted to go straight up because I wanted to get as far away from the ground as possible. The lack of sight only lasted for a second or so. And then as the seat did its thing, there's a drogue chute that deploys. The seat separates from the pilot, in this case me, and I get a parachute open above me. And I look up, and I have a good shoot, and I just remember thinking, at least something's working right today, right? And I looked down, and my jet was just scooting across the runways, or across the ground really fast. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm really glad I'm not in that still. And then I hit the ground. And I hit pretty hard. I ended up cracking my tailbone. When people eject from airplanes, the standard question you get is, well, how many swings did you get? Because when the parachute opens, the parachute will open, it'll breathe, so it'll just like deflate a little bit, and then it opens again, and then the swings start. And, you come down in the parachute in this side-to-side swinging motion. Well, I didn't get any swings. Basically my parachute opened, and it started the breathing process, and then I hit the ground. So I hit pretty darn hard. I had some friends that were at the end of the runway in jets saw me, and they said I bounced. So
wow.
I don't remember bouncing, but my tailbone sure felt like I bounced.
I've known quite a few people, strangely, that have also ejected. And you describe it in the same manner that they do, that you can kind of remember the sequence of things that happen. But in reality, how many seconds did this whole thing last?
From the time I pulled the handle to the time I got a chute above me was 2.3 seconds.
And then you immediately fell to the ground.
Yeah. So that was another, second or two. It was all over in, 5 seconds or so. But yes, I can remember every single bit of it.
And when you first started getting those indications for your airplane, you've spent hundreds of hours training and procedures and you follow checklists, but still you hope you don't ever have to get to the end of the checklist, that things resolve itself. So at what point did you ever get scared, if at all?
Yeah, I think when I first stepped on the brakes and nothing happened on the runway, because there's not much time to fix whatever's wrong, right? You're committed. You can't go anywhere. So I followed those procedures. And the funny thing is, the procedures say you're in channel 1 on the brakes. You go to channel 2 and you step on the brakes again. And they didn't work. And I will tell you honestly that not in accordance with the checklist, I went back to channel 1 because really I couldn't really believe what was happening, that I was not going to be able to stop this airplane. So I back to channel 1 and it didn't work either. And then you follow the procedures, you turn the anti-skid off and you try the brakes again. And then you put the hook down. And I missed the first cable. I knew I missed the first cable. And I thought, I did know that my hook unlocked light was not on, but my gear lights weren't on either. And my gear was down. So maybe my hook was down. But then I tried cycling the parking brake because if nothing else, it will blow the tires and maybe my airplane will stop on the concrete somewhere. But no, once I missed that second cable, there was no choice really. It's very dangerous to stay in the airplane at that point.
You didn't have time to be scared because this all happened so fast. And then you land, you are physically injured. And then you kind of go about your day after that. It didn't seem like you did anything differently. You told me that you went to your friend's house that night.
Yeah. So, I did something differently. I got a ride in the ambulance to the base hospital and got some x-rays and did all that. And then I went back to the squadron, just to see what was going on. And then my husband took me home and, my tailbone didn't really start hurting probably until we were on the way home. I think the adrenaline just lasted so long that I didn't even know I was hurt, honestly. But then, I had a good friend of mine. He called to check on me. He's like, I'm sure you might be getting lots of calls, but I just wondered, do you want to come by? And I looked at James and he's like, sure. So I said, yeah, let's go. So I did. I went to my friend's house that night, told the story, and just, it was nice to be in the company of people who cared.
That's not a lot of time to process physically, let alone emotionally. And in fact, 11 days after you ejected, you were cleared back to go fly.
Yes.
Did you register fear at all during that time as something that you were feeling? Did you need to listen to it? Or was that just simply noise to you?
I didn't really recognize the fear until I saw my name back on the schedule. And I went, oh, all right, let's go do this, right? But I did think about it. I thought the way I combat fear is through logic. It works for me. I know it's not the proper way to combat an emotion, but that's what works for me. So that's what I do. So I just thought about it to myself. I thought about all the things that I had fought for and worked so hard for over the last, I had 5 years as an F-16 pilot at this point. And, the first few years were not easy. So I had fought so hard to become a respected instructor in the F-16. I knew I either had to go fly again or give it up. And there was no way I was giving it up. So, I thought about my husband. I talked to my husband about it because, obviously he's an important part in my decisions. I thought about how my parents must have felt. But what it came down to for me at the end of the day was the ejection seat worked, right? When everything else didn't work, my ejection seat worked. And I was confident that if I needed it again, it would work. So I went and flew. For the first, 6 months or so, I wouldn't think about it until I came back to land and I put my landing gear down. And I'd check those lights and I'd have my 3 green lights and I'd think to myself, man, I hope my brakes work today. And it took a while for that feeling to leave me. Mm-hmm. It really did.
Even though we may not process it emotionally, it sounds like physically you did, going through those steps to land the airplane. Your body is kind of triggered because the body remembers what the mind will not acknowledge.
Yes, it does.
And you said that you suffered in silence, for those 6 to 9 months until one day you said something changed and you stopped worrying about those breaks. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it was, what are you going to do? You're in a fighter squadron. Fighter pilots are known for their bravado. It's not like you're going to go talk to your buddies and go, man, I get this feeling every time I land the airplane. So yes, I did keep it to myself. But I think it was just a matter of time, honestly. There was no more deep reflection or processing done on my part. There was just, after they work enough times, then you count on them to work again and you don't worry about it as much. And it was just really time passing that helped me get past that feeling.
And that idea of like, I'll deal with this feeling later is not isolated, and it shows up later in your life, especially with the pressure of being the first woman in that airframe. Did that belief feel like a strength or necessity?
Oh, it was a necessity, definitely. When I first started flying the F-16, I was not welcomed by a lot of people. I was very much unwelcome. So there was a battle then just to prove that I belonged, to prove that I could do what I knew I could do. I have good friends from the F-16 community, I do, but it wasn't until I connected with more women fighter pilots after I retired that I really felt like I had a community that I could have shared those things with.
And you continue to rise through the ranks, climb that Air Force corporate ladder, if you will. And in 2001, you end up getting a position at NORAD. And you went to this position instead of going to an overseas assignment at a headquarters because your thought process at the time is that if I'm stateside, I'll be isolated a little bit from the tempo of combat operations because you and your husband want to start a family.
Yes.
And on September 11th, 2001, you are working on duty at Cheyenne Mountain, which is inside a command and control center. Tell me about what happens that day, your experience.
Yeah, so I just want to say, one of the reasons I took that assignment and I went looking for that assignment, I had worked for the guy that I was working for before when I was in Germany, and he described the job to me as, we do a very important work, but we do it from 7:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, right? And if you've been in a fighter squadron or in any kind of like the Pentagon or somewhere like that, there's very few places in the military where you kind of have that schedule. And I kind of needed to slow down a little bit. So yes, but then that day, so it's my very first shift inside Cheyenne Mountain. We were doing an exercise. I was in J5, which is plans. And we had been split off as a strategy cell to deal with a real world occurrence going on up in the Bering Straits, between bear bombers and our fighters in Alaska. So we had actually separated from the exercise and we're in a different room. And I just kept hearing some conversation out from the main operations center area about an airplane crash. So finally I'm like, okay, I need to go see what's going on. I can't take it anymore. I went out and I watched on the big TV screen in that operations center, I watched the second airplane hit the tower in New York. And I just couldn't believe it. And I was standing behind a friend of mine, a Canadian Air Forces guy. And I said, what is going on? It's a beautiful VFR day. How does that happen? Because it's nice and sunny and clear. And he looked at me and he said, that's the second one. And that's when I knew that it wasn't an accident, right? It had to be an attack. There's no other explanation for two airplanes hitting buildings like that in the same morning. So then, I think the world changed for me. Mm-hmm. It changed for all of us, I think, that day.
And you're also 6 months pregnant at this point.
Yes, I am.
There must be a lot going through your mind.
Yes. And so one of the things that was kind of funny that day, so Cheyenne Mountain it is a mountain, and the command center is built within the mountain. And because there were still airplanes airborne and we didn't know what was going on, they shut the blast doors at Cheyenne Mountain. The first time they had ever shut them for a real world threat. So, when you're shut inside the mountain, it feels a little strange, but I got a lot of questions about, when's your baby due? How long before you have that baby? Because people were concerned, how long are we going to be shut in here? What's going to happen? But yeah, then, I didn't really think about the life changes until I got home that evening. So we had gone in at 4:30 that morning and we stayed till 7:30 that night when we essentially got kicked out because they wanted us back at 4:30 in the morning. So the second shift was there. We were all working together for a while. And then the early shift we left. So I went home and I was exhausted. So pretty much straight to bed. And we had a half moon window upstairs in our bedroom. And I laid down there and I could see the Defensive Combat Air Patrol flying in the United States from my bedroom window. And I just thought, what kind of world am I bringing our son into? What is his future going to be like? What is this United States going to be like? What is this going to lead to? And it was hard. It's not the kind of world I wanted him to be in. He's 24 now. And until we left Afghanistan in, I think it was 2023. Yeah. We had been at war his entire life.
Was that the first time you experienced a different kind of fear like that?
Yes. Right. It's not fear for myself. It's not fear. It's not physical fear or fear of physical harm. It's fear for, this life we created and what's his future going to be like? Yeah, it was very different.
It's a different world that he was going to inherit. And as a mother, you want to protect your children from all things. And now you're going to try to protect him from this world of fear that you talked about. What do you allow yourself to acknowledge regarding fear at this point for you?
I just went back to kind of what I did before. Yes, I'm fearful, but there's only so much I can do, right? Mm-hmm. So the best way that I'm going to fight that fear now is to do our job at NORAD, help defend the United States of America, and hope that our leadership, makes the right choices. Because as a major lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, you can only do so much. Mm-hmm. So it was more a function of just get back to work and keep doing what you can do to make the world safer.
But you aren't tasked with the easy tasks, because at this point you're in a very important strategist role as well. And you were tasked to write the rules of engagement, which included decisions about shooting down civilian aircraft, all while you're carrying this life within you. What toll did that take on you, and how did that affect your decision making?
It was hard. I mean, physically it was hard because we went to 12-hour shifts. This was September and Colin was born the end of December. So pretty far along. But also just the thought processes, right? Like you said, let's talk about, what the chain of command looks like and who's the approval authority for a Patriot battery or for an airplane of one of our fighters to shoot down a commercial airliner with, 100, 200, 250 people on board, right? Whoever thought you'd be doing something like that? But we deployed Patriot batteries around airports. We set up combat air patrols to keep the skies safe. And we did. I helped write that rules of engagement to shoot down commercial airlines. So it was obvious to me how much our world had changed.
You spend another 2 years finishing up your time at NORAD. And after that, you end up going back to fly F-16s. Everything on paper looks aligned. You're following the career dream that you wanted, which is on path to be the first female fighter squadron commander. But when your son, Colin, is 2.5 years old, your entire life changes. What happened?
Start at the beginning. Colin was swinging on the swing, and he loved the swing, and he was tilted his head back and laughing and having a great time. And I saw these looked like spots in his mouth. So I'm like, hey, buddy, let's go inside and check this out. So I get a little flashlight, and I look, and he's got a bunch of red spots on the inside of his mouth. Not on his tongue, but on his thinner parts of his cheeks and the roof of his mouth. So I'm like, okay, that's unusual. How are you feeling? He's like, he felt fine. Okay, great. So we get him an appointment at the doctor the next day. And I went to go to that appointment, but the doctor was running so late that I had to leave for a meeting for a stand-up, and my husband went. And basically the doctor told us it was a virus and he'll be fine, not to worry about it. So I think it was the next day that we traveled to Oklahoma for my brother's wedding. And Colin was pretty lethargic on the flight, which is unusual for him. He's flown quite a bit at this point, and he likes it, and he's excited. Not excited that day, just kind of, so I thought maybe he is fighting something, right? Doctor said he had a virus. We wake up after the night in the hotel the next morning, and he's spiking a fever over 101, 102, and we're like, okay, we need to get to the doctor again. So we just go to a civilian acute care clinic. And the first thing the doctor says to me is your son always this pale? And I said, well, he kind of has my coloring. Yeah, he's kind of pale. He goes, he looks really pale. I would like to do a CBC, which is just a complete blood count, right? A workup and see what's going on. Now he's even more lethargic, and he's just like a little lump. So they do the blood work, and they don't tell us what they think is wrong with him. They just tell us we need to get to Children's Hospital right away. To just go to the emergency room and don't stop at the desk, just walk back with our son. And oh, by the way, drive carefully, because if you get in an accident, he could bleed out. So, yeah, a smart mom might have at that point said, why don't we call an ambulance? But I wasn't thinking that clearly, right? And then I remember the nurse trying to give me directions of how to get to Children's Hospital. And I don't know Oklahoma very well, and she's just rattling them off. So I looked at her and said, would you please write these down for me, because I am not going to remember. My husband went back with my dad to get a car so we could drive to Children's Hospital. And we get Colin all buckled in, and I'm sitting in the front seat, but I just keep looking back at him because he's so quiet and so still that I'm worried. And then this giant Oklahoma thunderstorm just starts pouring down rain in buckets, right? The big booms, the rain coming down, the wipers going as fast as they can and hardly clearing the windshield. And I'm just thinking, yeah, don't get in an accident. Don't get in an accident. So we finally get to Children's Hospital. I'm sure it wasn't as long as it felt like, but we get there and I take Colin, James drops me off. I take Colin back and it just go right through. The lady at the desk yells at me and I'm like, nope, I'm going in. That's what they told me to do. And the doctors look at me or the nurse, is that Colin? And I'm like, yes. And they take him and they put us in a room and, it's a couple minutes later that James joins us after he found somewhere to park. And we're sitting there waiting for the doctor to come in. And I'm holding Colin, and his lips start turning blue. And James runs out and gets the nurse, and they get him some oxygen. So now I'm holding my little boy who's a lump, and he's on oxygen. And his lips aren't blue anymore, so I'm glad about that. But still, there's something very serious going on. So then the doctor comes in. And she starts talking about things that don't make sense to me. I can't even remember what she said at first. And I must have looked confused. So then she looked at me and says, has anybody even told you what we think is wrong with your son? And I said, no. And she just looked at me and flat out said, we think he has cancer. And I consider myself a relatively strong person, all the things I've been through in my life. And I felt like I was going to be physically ill. I looked at my husband and I said, honey, would you take Colin for a minute? And he's like, are you okay? And I said, no. And I went out in the hallway and I stood over a big trash can so that if I was going to be sick, it would at least be in the trash. I took some deep breaths. I got myself back under control and focused on Colin. And I went back in. And the doctor, who really, I don't know if she continued in pediatric medicine or not, but needs to work on how she talks to people. She looked at me and said, are you ready to listen to me now? And I fought down my natural impulse, which was not going to do us any good. And I said, yes. And she said, if it's what we think it is, we think your son has leukemia. It's called acute lymphocytic leukemia, and it's very treatable. And I'm like, okay, do you think you could have led with that? Instead of just your son has cancer? So she's talking some more, and finally I stopped and I said, okay, so is there any chance that our son's going to grow up and have a normal life? And this is when she actually said yes. She hadn't said that before. Okay, well, now I can listen better, right? Now I'm still in shock, but I know there's a chance that he's going to be okay and he can grow up and have the life he should have. So he gets admitted to the hospital. They want to start treatment right away, but if they start treatment right away, we can't travel for 30 days. We live in South Carolina and we're in Oklahoma, and that's not, what we want to do. So I spend the next few days, in addition to just caring for Colin and talking to family, trying to get us back to South Carolina. Mm-hmm. I was eventually able to get that done. We took a medevac, and they pumped Colin up with blood transfusions and platelets and things and, red blood cells, and off we went to South Carolina. And then we could start treatment. It was night by the time we got to South Carolina on the day we left. And so it was after hours, so the hospital was very quiet. But the woman who met us, Dr. Pirich, she's amazing. She was so welcoming and comforting. And I just felt like this might work out.
That time period was how long? From the time you went to acute care to when you got back to South Carolina?
We went to acute care on Friday, and we didn't go to my brother's wedding on Saturday. We missed that. And we flew to South Carolina on Monday.
It's such a short period of time. And your initial reaction to this really, truly devastating, every parent's greatest fear is so visceral. It's so physical. Is that the first time you truly felt that kind of level of fear in your life?
Oh yeah. I've never felt physical fear that made me feel like I was going to be sick before. Thank God, not since.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and it was just the way it came out, right? Well, we think your son has cancer. And I'm like, what? No, he's got a virus, right? We took him to the doctor on Thursday. He's got a virus. That was not well done. We'll say that.
The other thing that strikes me about it is how dismissive of your feelings, how dismissive of your concern that process was, not just with the doctor, but also with the fact that, yes, he has, quote unquote, the good kind of cancer that is possibly curable. That's still not enough comfort to bring you, knowing that your child is so sick. Did you feel that you were even allowed to have that fear, knowing that this doctor wasn't going to give you time to process? And given the fact that the type of cancer that your son had was the one that was probably going to be okay, did you feel justified in being scared?
Oh yeah, I was justified in being scared. But I also was focused on getting us to South Carolina. So I was busy either sitting with Colin and cuddling him or playing with him, or I was on the phone trying to get us to South Carolina, because if we didn't have a plan by Monday, they were starting treatment there. They weren't going to wait any longer.
Your approach to his illness and, basically the execution, the logistics of it all, you approached this in a very similar way that you approached every crisis that you have before, which is with data, with discipline, with education, with control. Did that strategy help you survive, or did it just keep your fears at bay long enough to function?
I was still pretty fearful as we started this process, but the more I know about something, the better I feel about it. So the more I learned about ALL, and the more I learned about the clinical trials that were ongoing to fine-tune treatment, I was still scared, right? I think at the time for boys, the success rate was like 88%. So, that's pretty good odds, right? But, like I read in one of the things I was reading, for your child, it's 100% or zero, right? They're either better or they die. There's no in between. So 88% is pretty good, but it's not, I was still scared. And as Colin started treatment and he went through the treatment and he responded textbook. His body did everything it was supposed to do. He didn't relapse at all. Everything went well, but then the level of fear starts to lower a little bit, right? Because you're starting to see some progress and your kid's got some energy again. Yes, he's losing his hair, but he's got some energy sometimes. But now we know it's a 3-year process. If everything goes perfectly, his treatment is going to last 3 years. So from the time he was almost 3 to the time he was almost 6, our son was taking medicine every day, getting spinal taps regularly, getting blood work done on a regular basis. It was, even though it all ended up well, right? Colin's perfectly healthy. Those were not an easy 3 years for a family. And at the time I saw other families, we see each other at Children's Hospital and kids are on the same treatment schedule kind of thing. And one of them, they had just opened their own business and they had to shut that down because they didn't have, the health insurance was from the wife's work at some kind of retail store. And they had to keep the health insurance so they could treat their son. And they couldn't both work because the immune system is so compromised by the treatment that somebody needs to stay home with your child. They can't go to daycare, can't go to school half the time. So I was thankful of the support I had. I was thankful for the medical community that was helping us. I was very thankful for our military support. We're in South Carolina and I grew up in California. So my family is California, Washington, and Oklahoma. So yeah, I was just thankful the way the military stepped in. They brought us meals, they helped us. My boss was very understanding about my returning to work because it was kind of slow to get back to work and to get my brain to a space where I even felt like I might be able to fly again, right? I have a job to do. And luckily for us, we were financially in a position that James could stay home. So he stayed home, became stay-at-home dad, and it made it a lot easier for me going back to work knowing Colin was with his dad. Mm-hmm. He would be well cared for. I wasn't worried about anything going wrong.
I mean, work must have been a welcome distraction at times, but going back to flying is a different element because there is so much risk, right? Were you approaching getting back in the airplane differently now? Was a new fear unlocked?
Yeah. So there was a reason I was put in plans for my staff job. I'm a planner, right? Since Colin was little, there's been a letter in our fire safe to him in case something happened to me. And I would update it every once in a while. But yeah, going back to fly, I wasn't really worried about the risk of flying. It was just, I can't put one more thing on James and Colin, right? I need to be there. So getting back to flying was okay, but it just took weeks before I could focus enough, right? When I first went back to work just in the office, I would sit at my computer and I would do some emails and I would go to a meeting and that was it. I mean, I was done for the day. It was just too much because it seemed like I really just needed to be home. Mm-hmm. But then as treatment progressed and, I see Colin and James and they're doing well, then it got easier and easier to spend more time at work. And then it got okay for me to go fly. And I would think about Colin, there's a process whenever we go fly. We mission plan, we brief, we step to the jet, we go to our mission, we come back, we debrief, right? So when the briefing, I could focus and I wouldn't think about Colin and James. And then right before we stepped to fly, I would think about them and maybe even check in with them on the phone real quick. I would go fly and I'd be fine until, I would like to say until I got back in the squadron, but no, it really wasn't. Once the mission was over and I was landed and taxiing back, that's when Colin came back into my brain. And I wonder how he's doing today. I hope he's doing okay, kind of thing. So then once we got parked and walking back to the squadron, I'd get on the phone again and check in.
Did you realize that you were maybe not actually feeling all of it and you're just trying to manage it?
Yes. And I think that in some ways, you almost have to do that, right? How much good are you going to be to your family or to anybody if you're just worried all the time that your son's going to die? You just can't let that fear take over. Mm-hmm. So, there were times when James and I would talk about it, but not even really that often. We're just going to go through this process and it's all going to be good at the end, right? At the end of our 3 years, everything's going to be okay. And luckily it was, but I just really wouldn't entertain any other outcome. I couldn't.
Right. But sometimes the reality smacks you in the face and you actually did kind of a make-a-wish kind of experience for one of Colin's little friends. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Shaw had a Pilot for a Day program where you could bring a local kid in and they'd hang out with a fighter pilot and they'd get to go in the simulator and they'd do some things. So one of Colin's friends who had I'm going to get this wrong. I think it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but he had been in treatment for a lot longer and it was not going well. But I managed to get him approved. He was under the age you're supposed to be to do Pilot for a Day, but we got him approved. And I just remember, Colin and him hanging out in the squadron because Colin went to see him that day, after he was done. And they're just sitting at the, at the table in the squadron chatting and having fun. They're two little bald heads because they both lost their hair. And it was such a meaningful day for their family, right? Their boy enjoyed it as well, but just the whole family, brothers and sisters and everybody was there. So it was special. And it was, a couple months before he passed away.
How did that affect you and how did it affect Colin?
Yeah, Colin struggled with it because I don't think that he, this started before he was 3 years old. So there's times when I figured out by things he would say to me that he didn't realize that not everybody goes through this, right? It's just his normal life as far as he can remember. So when his Fred died, that was very hard. And basically the way I tried to handle his fear was explaining to him that he had a very different kind of illness, right? That they knew that he was struggling and that the treatment wasn't going well. And, they've never said that about us. Your treatment's going great, and just trying to reassure him because I don't know that I don't think he understood at that point or any time until he was older that they could kill him. It was just something he had to do. He just had to take this medicine and he just had to go to the doctor more and he just had to do all the things. But I don't think he understood the risk, which is how I wanted it, really.
And after those 3 years, Colin finishes chemo. He's about 6 years old. And you must have felt relief. But you told me it didn't completely feel like freedom because now everything in your mind shifted.
Yeah. So as we were approaching the end of his treatment, I was very excited. We had planned an end of treatment party, but then I realized as it got closer, there was a different kind of fear setting in because the medicine has been keeping leukemia at bay all these years, right? And they do this for so long because they think they've kept it at bay long enough, it's not going to come back. But you don't know if it's going to come back until you stop the medicine. So stopping the medicine was positive in that we're done, right? We have survived our 3 years and Colin's healthy and we're good. But then it was also, what's going to happen now? Is it going to stay gone, right? When we stopped the medicine, it was hard as well because now I'm waiting. You go to get the blood counts done the next time. You go back to the doctor, and I think it's only a week later or 2 weeks, and you're just going, this is going to tell us if, how he's doing. And then, you just keep going back and getting blood work done on a regular basis. And eventually you open up into this time frame where it gets farther and farther, right? So now you only have to go once a month. And once we got to once a month, then I started feeling pretty good. We'd been probably 6 months, maybe 10 months of everything working. And it's one of those things like that. The farther you get away from it, the better. Mm-hmm. Right? The longer you go off treatment without it coming back, the higher the chance it's not going to come back. So we just, once again, it was time and just getting through to where we could say at the 5-year point that he's officially cured. Mm-hmm. Right? So when he's almost 11 years old, he's officially cured.
And near the end of his treatment, you make a pretty significant decision in your career. You surprise a lot of people and you decide to retire from the Air Force. You're abandoning all of your original career dreams and you become an airline pilot at Southwest. And this was to prioritize the stability of your family, the stability of his treatments over your career goals. How difficult was that for you?
I look back at it and I think it was harder than it should have been, if that makes sense. Because the plan for me, if I got to be a squadron commander, I would go to Korea to be a squadron commander. Because there's 3 F-16 squadrons in Korea. Everybody goes there at some point in their career, and I had never been. So that was going to be the plan. And I was okay with that plan. And even after Colin got sick, I thought I was okay with that plan. And then I was a TDY in Las Vegas for a while. And Colin had a subcutaneous port, so under his skin. So anytime he got a fever, got sinus infection or whatever it was, kids get colds. He had to go in the hospital and they had to run blood cultures and start IV antibiotics to make sure it wasn't a blood infection. So while I was in Las Vegas, that happened, right? And it's not that unusual. I wasn't that worried, but it made me realize that being halfway across the world, while my son was still undergoing chemotherapy, no matter how well things had been going so far, was not the right answer. It just wasn't. Mm-hmm. Because, you're going to be in charge of a frontline combat squadron. You can't just go running home if something happens with your kid, right? I could imagine staying there if something went wrong with Colin's treatment. So, yes, I made the decision that I was going to retire, and I went back basically to Shaw, and I told my squadron commander, and then just on up the chain, explaining that I wanted to be taken off the squadron commander's consideration list. And everybody was very supportive. My wing commander, he totally understood why I was making the decision, but he did tell me, I just want to make sure you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? And I was like, yes, sir, I understand. Mm-hmm. So I worked on getting my type rating so I could get hired at Southwest.
And years pass, and at the age of 11, Colin is declared cured. The immediate crisis is over, and all that fear that you postponed, all that grief that you deferred, all that trauma that you told yourself you'd process later, do you start to acknowledge it then?
Not really then. When something's buried, it's easy to keep it buried. I wasn't big on self-reflection, but as I started learning about coaching and understanding more about how the mind and the body work together, it was when I left Southwest Airlines actually before I left Southwest Airlines, but I started working towards being a public speaker and a coach. And as I started writing down stories, right, there's all these story ideas, and I started reflecting. That's a lot of time of reflection of the battles basically I went through to be who I was. And that was when I started really processing everything. Mm-hmm. And it was hard. I spent a lot of afternoons just really troubled, going through the stories of what I was put through by people who didn't want me in the community, the stories of what we went through with Colin. My dad, we didn't talk about this, but my dad had a routine gallbladder operation that went wrong, and he was in ICU for, 6 weeks or so while I was in F-16 training. There's been a lot that I had repressed, if you will. Mm-hmm. So it took its toll. I had some physical issues by the time I left Southwest Airlines that are a result, I think, of prolonged stress. And I've been retired now from Southwest 5 years, and things are improving. Mm-hmm. But it takes a long time for your body. Like you said, your body knows. So it's been good for me to go through all that and to reckon with it, if you will, to just face it and accept what was wrong, what was good, what was bad. There's a lot of good that came from my time in the F-16. A lot of good friends, a lot of good experiences. But when I look back on it, like a lot of things, I just wish it hadn't been so dang hard. Why did it have to be the way it was? Why does your son have to get cancer? Why does your dad, the only, one of 0.5% who this gallbladder operation goes awry and they don't catch it? I mean, it's good to think about those things, though, and to get them out, if you will, right? And to not keep them buried.
As a public speaker, that is storytelling, right? And you are, on top of everything you said, you went through an ejection. You had 9/11 anxiety. There was PTSD, years of parenting under just extreme emotional circumstances, mourning the shift in your career. It's just that constant toll of vigilance that you were on. Where are you in processing it now? And what finally allowed you to have healing take place in your life?
I think stopping flying, honestly, not having to compartmentalize on a daily basis. And then the process of going through all those memories, right? If you're going to be a professional speaker, what are you going to talk about? Well, I take stories from my life and learn lessons from them like we do in a fighter pilot debrief. And I try to share those lessons because even if the story is not applicable specifically, the general lesson is. So going through all those stories and all the things that happened and bringing them out into the light, if you will, right? And writing it out. I recommend journaling to some of my clients, but I tell them right off the bat, I am not good at journaling. Some people are, some people aren't. So I'm still not good at journaling. But I did write a lot of those stories, and that had the same kind of cathartic effect on me.
I think it's interesting that you say you don't like journaling because you are a beautiful writer. If you haven't checked out Betty's Substack, you definitely need to follow it because you articulate, I think, what so many people are feeling so well with so much clarity. It sounds like to me you were able to stop compartmentalizing because maybe that was the first time in your life where nobody depended on you. As a pilot, the safety measures and everybody else in the sky, you have to be on your game because it is a highly dangerous profession. Even as an airline pilot, the safety of your crew and all the passengers is just constantly on your mind. And then as a parent, especially of a young child, their safety is constantly on your mind. Your son's now 24. You're not flying airplanes anymore. You're working for yourself. Is that finally the space that you were able to take for yourself? Because what did fear teach you when you were able to give it room for the first time?
I think that's a good point as to why it all happened when it did, right? I had finished with my careers, if you will. I was done working and supporting the family. Colin was in college. I think the way I handled fear in the moment, I think is healthy because you can't let fear rule what you're going to do or what you're not going to do. I also think it's healthy to go back and take a look at it And I think that what that gives you is you get the chance to look and see, was your fear valid, right? Was what you were feeling, was it appropriate based on the circumstances? And then you can go back and you look at, how did you handle that, right? And what did you do? And then what was the outcome? Kind of like a debrief. I still do that technique a lot in my life. But yes, so I had a chance to go back and say, well, I could have handled this better. What would I do differently this time? Or I could go back and say, yeah, actually, you handled that pretty darn well. Good on you, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that's important, to go back on pivotal events in your life, whatever they are, and you kind of just dissect them and figure out what you can learn to do better the next time. And that's what I finally had a chance to do with these things that had happened to me, that I had been part of. That helped a lot, to just go back and look and say, you know, and I know I've mentioned it before, but our family, Colin and James and I, are stronger because of what he went through. Mm-hmm. You know, I have a great relationship with my 24-year-old, and so does his dad, and we still have a good relationship with each other. So, you know, that wasn't what doesn't kill you make you stronger. Yes, but it definitely made our family stronger as well. So, I'm ready for, what is that funny saying? You know, I'm strong enough. You know, I don't need any more tests, please. I don't feel like I need to develop my resilience anymore. I'm happy to have a little break. Hopefully I'm not jinxing myself. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to be in that place where I don't have an alarm clock very many days. I write what I want to write. I speak where I want to speak. I coach people I want to coach, and it's all done because it's what I want to do and what's important to me, not because I have to. And I appreciate how freeing that is.
So Betty, what is your truth now?
My truth is that fear is natural. How you handle it will have huge impact on your life, and that it's worthwhile when you have the opportunity to go back and review what you did and learn from it.
And when you work with people, when you're speaking and coaching, what do you want them to know about their fears?
That fear is not rational. So sometimes you're going to go back and look, and that you're going to go, I should not have been that afraid of that little tiny spider, or whatever it is, right? But just because it's not rational doesn't mean it's not how you feel. So there's ways to overcome it, you know. But first you have to recognize it, you have to accept it, and then you can work towards overcoming it and developing that courage you need to do what you want to do in life.
Is there a right time for fear?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's definitely times you should be afraid, right? Your house is on fire. Let's be afraid. You know, there's time and place for it, but it's a physical response, right? It's a part of your brain that responds without you controlling it. Mm-hmm. And it's designed to keep us alive. You know, it's a survival instinct. So there's definitely a place for fear. But, you know, as we continue to evolve as people, how we handle our fear is important measure, because that's what's going to allow you to do the things you want to do or the hard things you need to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you allowed yourself the grace to feel fear enough?
Probably not. I am a lot better now at giving myself grace than I used to be. So I wasn't easy enough on myself in the moments. Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's also part of who I am, right? And how I could do some of the things I did. So that's part of giving yourself grace, is accepting that some of the things that are good in one sense can cause you problems in another about yourself, mm-hmm. right? There's two sides to the coin, whether, you know, is it determination or is it stubbornness? So I think understanding yourself and recognizing the good and the bad of your innate characteristics, if you will, then that's that's a part of growth that we could all use.
To navigate something like a serious illness with a child or a serious injury, you really do have to put on a brave face. So to the parents who are navigating this circumstance, what do you want to say to them as parents, and what advice do you have for them as a team?
Yeah, the first piece of advice I would say, which is funny because we were just talking about it, is give yourself grace. You're going to have days that are harder than others. You're going to have days where it hits you more than others. And give yourself grace when that happens. And then the other thing I would say is accept the support that people want to give you. I'm very much an independent person. We don't need a lot of help, kind of, I was raised that way. But when Colin was sick and people from the squadron were bringing over meals all the time, I was so thankful and so appreciative. And I just think that what I learned is when something bad happens to someone you care about, helping them makes you feel better, right? So the people who are bringing us meals, they all have kids. They're very thankful that it's not their kid that has leukemia. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I would be thankful too, right? Mm-hmm. But this gives them something to do, something that feels like they're making a difference for the family that's going through this. And I'm not trying to say they're being selfish and being helpful. I'm just trying to say that as the person receiving the help, if you understand that by letting people help you, you're actually helping them as well, it can be easier to accept that help. And I think that accepting help in those kind of situations is very important.
Before you go, it's time for Truth Be Told. You're going to answer truth or lie. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Lie.
It's important to keep calm and carry on.
True.
If Colin had seen me cry, he would have been more afraid.
True.
Flying with a broken tailbone was not a good idea.
Lie.
Oh, you think? Last one. I'd do it all again.
True.
Betty, thank you for being here today. You are one of the most courageous people I know. You reinforce the belief that strength isn't the absence of fear, but the presence of fear, plus the willingness to feel it and showing up anyway. If you want to learn more about Betty's speaking, coaching, or her work, visit SharonPreszler.com. And I highly recommend you follow her on Substack at The Betty Preszler. If you're looking for a meaningful way to support families battling childhood cancer and blood disorders, we encourage you to learn more about Camp Chemo, a cause deeply personal to Betty. Camp Chemo creates space for joy, community, and healing for children and families when life feels anything but normal. As always, the links are in the show notes and on liesmyego.com. If you love this podcast, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and share this episode with someone who needs to hear that their fear is not weakness, it's simply human. Thank you so much for your story today.
Thank you, Lilo. I really appreciate being here.